And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Brad Olsen, award-winning author and conference speaker who's appeared on dozens of TV shows, including Ancient Aliens and America Unearthed. He's traveled to all 7 continents seeking adventure and the answers to the mysteries of humankind's past. Basically, Brad is a real-life Indiana Jones, right, Brad?
I guess you can call me that, Jeff. As much as I'd like to get into some of these new archaeological digs, you can't always be so lucky. But hey, if I ever had the chance, sure. Let me go find the Lost Ark. I'll do it.
Are you ever bringing home treasure?
Well, that's illegal, highly illegal. No, I never have.
Well, I'd like to talk to you today about all the mysteries of South America. And let's start with who were the pre-Incan people.
Yeah, this is really where the story begins in South America, because when you go on a tour, a guided tour, as I was doing 7 years ago with Brian Forrester and Nassim Harriman and several others, Adam Apollo was also on that trip. I was one of the guest speakers as well. If you listen to what the mainstream people are talking about, they'll tell you that it was all built by the Incans. But when we go around on our tours, Brian Forrester primarily was saying, look, this stuff predates the Incans. And he would show us examples in the city of Cuzco where there would be these megalithic, ginormous stones perfectly fitted. And then on top of them were smaller stones, well fitted, but not quite as exact or megalithic as the first. And then on top of those were the Spanish design bricks with mortar. The other two rarely contain mortar. Certainly the pre-Incan ones didn't. So you're seeing 3 different levels of construction, sometimes within a single building itself. And so we were very interested in the pre-Incan architecture of South America. And that is, of course, the oldest architecture and the best built, as well as having these megalithic features that are all over the place. I mean, there's so many, Steve, that you go by some of them on, say, the drive up from Cuzco to Sacsayhuaman, and you see a couple megalithic sites. You barely bat an eyelid because there's so many. In fact, this area of Peru has the most amount of megaliths in the world per square mile. So it's just chock full of these ancient artifacts. And indeed, the Incan people themselves even said, we rolled into this town and we saw that there was already a city built, and we just adapted to it and built our constructions right on top of it. And why wouldn't you? You've already got most of the hard work done building the foundation and most of the walls. So just go ahead and finish them off, put in a wooden roof and whatever bricks you need to continue to seal off that enclosure.
How are you guys able to determine that these structures are older than the Incan civilization? By carbon dating or something else?
Well, you cannot carbon date stone. You can carbon date the lichen that is on some of these megaliths, because some of this, the lichen does indeed grow for hundreds of years. So you can tell that some of the older remnants of the lichen, sometimes underneath the living growth, will show you some of these dates are thousands of years old. And of course, the Incans are not that old. They just came onto the scene around 1200 AD. And again, they just said, we adopted to the buildings that were already there. So it is like a lost culture when we talk about the pre-Incan culture, and that their building technique was also reminiscent of many other megalithic structures around the world, which I find really fascinating because it shows that there could have been this interaction and building technique style that was shared among many other cultures, such as the Egyptians, such as out way in the Southeast Asia, like in Angkor Wat area, and even underwater, such as the Yonaguni ruins under the water off the island of Yonaguni, southernmost island in Japan. I'm working on a book right now, Steve. I'm sorry, Jeff, that will come out. There's another Steve Mara that I'm doing an interview with tomorrow that is going to be about underwater archaeology. And so when you talk about what could possibly be built underwater, at least on a megalithic scale, it's impossible. So this civilization must go back to at least the last ice age, when you could have constructed these megalithic structures underwater, which are now underwater, submerged.
Do you feel that the ancient aliens theory about ETs coming and helping us build the structures is what happened? Or did we have a prior civilization that was very technological that just got wiped out?
I've been on a panel with Graham Hancock and read his books, and we've had some off-camera conversations about the aging and dating of everything. And Graham Hancock is very apt to say that everything keeps getting dated older and older and older. And I would agree with him. He did that show on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse, which goes around the world and shows that there was this very high-tech megalithic building civilization during the last ice age and even earlier. I mean, sometimes these ruins can be dated not just thousands of years old, but hundreds of thousands of years old or older, based on where they're positioned when the sea levels were much lower, such as Yonaguni in Japan.
Do you feel like there's a concerted effort by the powers that be that are hiding this information from us? Or it's just the ego of science that still believes the Indians built these things?
This really goes back to a lot of our very old artifacts in North America, and the whole idea that Smithsonian Institution has buried or disposed of giant bones as well as other artifacts. They're called out-of-place artifacts, Jeff. It's when you find an artifact, say, in a coal mine that must be thousands, millions of years old in some cases. There was one found in Siberia, which I have a picture of in my book, Modern Esoteric, of gears that were found in a seam of coal that were at least 2 million years old. So how can you possibly do that unless you were a very advanced civilization way back when? So Earth is much, much older than we've ever accounted it to be. And so when you bring up these subjects like Graham Hancock did in Ancient Apocalypse, he got a lot of blowback from the academics who would not even look at his evidence. It kind of reminded me of when Galileo was put in front of the Inquisition and he set up a telescope. He said, here, you can look and I'll show you the planets, how they go around the sun. And the famous line from the Inquisition that he said was, they wouldn't even look. They won't even look at the evidence. They're so entrenched in their own dogma that they won't even take a look for themselves because they don't want to change their minds.
How do you think they were able to move those 70-ton stones?
Well, this is the $10 million question here. And in fact, this is one of the topics that I spoke on Ancient Aliens about, particularly a site in the South Pacific called Non Madal. And this is a megalithic site. It's called the Venice of the Pacific. And it's very, very old because it's partially sunken into the ocean. So it must have been constructed at least during the last ice age, if not older. And one of the big mysteries of Non Madal, and this is what I talked about on the site, was on the Ancient Aliens program, was how they moved these megalithic stones. And they know where the quarry is on the island of Non Madal in Micronesia, but they had to move them around the island and cross over a water passage and then get them to the site where they were going to use them. And that's as big of a mystery as what was this construction all about. And so what I talked about on Ancient Aliens was this technique of auditive levitation. And we also discussed this on the South America trip, that many of these blocks had to travel great distances. In the case of Ollantaytambo, the Temple of the Sun is located up on this high cliff with many other megalithic structures. But the biggest blocks are in this Temple of the Sun that came from a quarry down the valley, across the river, up another tall mountain. How did they do it? Well, auditive levitation is using the resonant frequency of these blocks. And if you're able to match that resonant frequency with another frequency, say a tuning fork or some kind of frequency vibration, you can actually render the matter weightless. So then it's merely a matter of just pointing it in the direction where you want it to go. You're keeping it in that resonant frequency state where it's levitating, and then you're just kind of pushing it along where you want it to go. As soon as that resonant frequency stops, then gravity kicks in and it falls down to the ground. And oftentimes that's where it stays, such as some of the blocks that were found on the trail to Ollantaytambo are still there, and they can't move them because they're so huge. And there are videos on YouTube of using this technique where a bowling ball is levitating and rotating around. Even a living frog, it doesn't kill animals or people for that matter if you're to do it, but it does demonstrate that you can levitate just about any object, including very heavy ones.
Have you been to the Coral Castle down in Florida?
I have indeed. Yeah. And there's a great example of this little 99-pound weakling guy. His name was Ed Liskalian. He was from Latvia, and he come over here as an immigrant, could barely even speak English, taught himself over time, but enough to purchase this piece of land, which was a second property. The first was closer to Miami, and the second one, where the Coral Castle in it, is in Homestead, Florida, just about 20 miles west of Miami. And he moved the original Coral Castle over there. And so he ordered a flatbed truck to show up at the old site. And he said, okay, just leave the truck here and come in the morning and we'll move the stuff over there. And he said, wait a minute, how are you going to move this? He said, don't worry about that. Just show up in the morning and we'll move it. And sure enough, loaded on that flatbed the next morning were all the megalithic blocks that he was going to move, some of them weighing 33 tons. And so then he goes to build the Coral Castle that we see today. And when I took the tour, I kept asking the guide, I mean, how did he move these things? You guys ever talk about auditive levitation? And they didn't really want to entertain that question. They said he did it all with gears and levers, and he was a master at moving heavy objects like this, and even placing some of them where a child could just touch a megalithic door on hinge and it would turn around and spin. So the guy was a master builder engineer with no training whatsoever. Just came over here as basically an illiterate immigrant. And he built this whole Coral Castle. When asked, how did you do it? All he would say is, I know the secrets of how they built the pyramids in Egypt. And so I think what he was saying is, I knew the secret, perhaps a memory, a past life recall of auditive levitation, of how to do it.
Have you experimented on trying to do it yourself at all?
I have not. No, that would be a big test. But I do love the videos, and in my book Future Esoteric, I talk about a Swedish doctor named Dr. Jarl, who went to Tibet as a young man and met the lamas of Tibet. And they knew he was a very good doctor, very ethical. And one of the top lamas came down with an illness, and they didn't feel like there was any other way to help this top lama but to bring Dr. Jarl out from Sweden. So he was summoned, and he came back, and he helped this lama out regain his health. And for doing so, they rewarded him with showing Dr. Jarl how they could use auditive levitation. And basically what they did was they took him out to a site with, about 50 or 75 different lamas, or different Tibetans who were mostly monks. Some of them were playing their long trumpet. Others were on drums. But the most amount of them were just monks chanting. And he's sitting there watching them, and they set up in a horseshoe configuration with a giant boulder right in the middle of all of them. And then they start chanting and playing their music and getting this resonant frequency high enough to the point where the boulder starts shaking, trembling, and then it rises up in the air and moves over to a cliff where they want it to go. And what I found out recently is another part of that was also the consciousness of the monks and the lamas who are participating. Because when they were chanting and playing their instruments, they were basically looking down. And when they got this cacophony of sound to a certain level, this resonant frequency that rendered the boulder weightless, they all looked up at the same time. And right at that moment, the boulder also rose up. So there was a consciousness part element into all this. And Dr. Jarl drew these diagrams of how they did it, the configuration of the musicians and the chanters, and also a diagram of how it trajectory made its way over to that high cliff. And I reproduced those images in Future Esoteric. In fact, I'll pull it out here and show you, because it's really amazing. And this is some of the evidence that our ancestors had this technology for a long time. And here it is. These are Dr. Jarl's drawings of the assembled monks. In the middle is the boulder, and then the trajectory of that boulder going up the cliff. In my book, Future Esoteric. So I like to, people are very visual these days, Jeff, and I like to give them these images as best I can so they can visualize the content of these books that I produce.
Well, not only did they have to move these giant stones, but they cut them perfectly so they don't have to use mortar. Do you think they were using lasers or some other tool?
That's the other big mystery of these megaliths. And we addressed that during my trip. And Nassim Haramein, he is one of these new physicists that is breaking grounds with several new experiments that he's doing in a laboratory that he runs in Southern California. And he was saying that they are working on a technique called cold plasma, that they were able to use a technique to render stone into a soft, malleable state, not liquid, but just soften a stone. And so this cold plasma technique could be how they basically took a rough stone and then put it in place and then fitted it around the other bricks so perfectly. So, for example, if you can just think of someone who works in plaster, they use a trowel. And some of the stones we saw in South America actually show the trowel marks still on them, that when these stones were softened, they could be fitted very perfectly. And just think when something like plaster is in a state of drying, you still have an opportunity to poke it around the edges and make it a really nice, clean line. And same thing with these megaliths. But also when they were drying, many of the megaliths have these little nodes that procure out. And you'll see in some of the pictures I sent you in that presentation of mine called Mysteries of South America, where you see these nodes protruding out, mostly on the lower part of the megalithic stone. And they let them stay in there for what reason, I don't know. But if you can just imagine how when something of this size is drying and molding back into its state, that you would have little bulges come out, little soft parts where it's just protruding out. And so that's kind of the mystery of these nodes on the megalithic stones, is that perhaps this was part of the drying process, and this was the excessive stone that was kind of coming out when it was in its softened state.
Well, I believe melting all these rocks together makes sense. Why all the cuts are like all these weird cuts. And
yeah, that's a word called vitrification. It's the literal melting of stone. So you're talking about a heat source that must be much, much greater than anything you could make from a fire, for example. I mean, we're talking on the scale of nuclear heat. And vitrification is found around the world once again, that there was some kind of nuclear cataclysm that's taken place. And that too shows signs in, there's several castles up in Scotland that have vitrification where it just melts right over the seams. So they're megalithic buildings, but then melted on top of that. The best evidence is in the Indus Valley, present-day Pakistan. Several sites there called Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. When they were excavating Mohenjo-daro, they found that there are people, skeletons, laying dead in the street, sometimes even holding hands, as if they were just killed instantly from the flash of a nuclear bomb. So somebody had the foresight to bring out a Geiger counter and ran it over some of these skeletons. Sure enough, they were very high in radioactivity, that they had been exposed to some kind of nuclear flash that killed them in an instant. And there they laid until they were uncovered. Other evidence in the Sahara Desert, not too far from Egypt, are these vitrified round explosion marks, which literally turn the sand into glass. And again, you must have some kind of very hot heat source to be able to do that. And there they are, not just in the Sahara, but there are other pockmarks like this in India and other locations in Asia. So this kind of begs the question, was there some kind of high-tech civilization that went to war with each other, such as the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria having at it? And this is the remnants that are still there.
what about Puma Punku? Because that place looks like it was blasted in a war. Is there any evidence of radiation there?
Well, I don't know about the radiation aspect or the vitrification. I didn't see any of that or heard about it when I visited 7 years ago. But Puma Punku is the only site that everybody agrees is pre-Incan, because it's so old that it's actually scattered about like a kid's Lincoln log set when you just throw it up in the air and basically destroy it. And basically what that means is that that the Puma Punku is just scattered around everywhere. And I have an image of what it looked like when it was in its basically stage where it was built before it was collapsed apart. Now, people need to understand that the area around Puma Punku, which is now 8 or several miles away from Lake Titicaca, which is the tallest, highest alpine lake in the world. It's at 13,000 feet above sea level, but it had once been at sea level. In fact, it's an ancient volcanic caldera, but it had once been linked to the ocean because there are freshwater seahorses in Lake Titicaca. It's the only place in the world where seahorses are normally only in the ocean, in warm oceans. I mean, we had them in our aquarium when we were kids. They're cool little aquatic animals. But the freshwater ones all come from Lake Titicaca. So there was a time when the land rose up, and I would assume that is when the Pumapunku monument was completely destroyed in a very cataclysmic pole shift type of event that rose that lake and that caldera up high and trapped the water and made the what was once on the shores of Lake Titicaca, because there are piers that show evidence of water erosion that Pumapunku had once been on the shore of Lake Titicaca. Now it's miles away, but that it was subsequently destroyed in this leveling up of the land in this area of South America, which is on the border of Peru and Bolivia.
Why do you think we don't see these megalithic structures in the US or Canada? Is it because they were under ice or underwater at the time when all the other structures were built?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I should tell you that I grew up in the Chicago area, and right about where I was in northwestern suburbs of Chicago was right at the edge of what's known as the Wisconsin glaciation, which was one of the last glaciers in the last ice age to reach all the way down to basically the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. And just over the border in Wisconsin, you see these moraines, these glacier carved valleys and hills from the Wisconsin glaciation. In fact, all the Great Lakes are the remnants of the water that melted after this last ice age. But the problem with building megaliths in North America, especially in the Midwest, there are just no readily available rock sources. It's all earth over the rocks. Now, there are some quarries, but they had to dig down through the layers of earth to get to the rock. But the ancient people didn't have that ability. So what they did was just built out of earth. And that's the Cahokia mounds, and many of the mound sites throughout the Midwest are all earthen mounds. Well, the largest mound at Cahokia, which is in Illinois, but just over the Mississippi River from St. Louis, which was once called Mound City. There were so many mounds. They're almost all virtually gone now. But Cahokia survived. And at the time it was built, Cahokia had a bigger population than London, around 1000 AD. And they were building Monk's Mound. The original name is not known. It was just called that because some Trappist monks lived in the area and planted some trees on the largest mound there. But it had a larger base than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. That's how big it was. And it's still there, and you can climb it. And I've been there several times, including with the Journey to Truth guys. We did a documentary about Cahokia, and I spoke about it and several of the mound sites in the area. So they basically didn't have ready-made quarryable stone like they did in South America or Central America or even Asia, Egypt, and elsewhere. So they had to build out of earth, and they did.
What is your take on the Nazca lines?
Yeah, the Nazca lines are quite fascinating. It's not just in the area of Nazca, Peru, although that is the highest concentration of these lines. There are some in Bolivia, some in Chile, but most are around the Nazca region. And there are these giant geometric shapes, sometimes in a long rectangle, which Eric von Daniken in his groundbreaking book, Chariot of the Gods, which is really the precursor to Ancient Aliens. I mean, he is, to just give the props where the credit is due, Eric von Daniken is the original ancient alien theorist. And Giorgio is from Switzerland himself, Giorgio Tsoukalos, the main star of Ancient Aliens, and I know them both. Knew Giorgio before he became famous. In fact, I was in the car with him. I was driving with David Hatcher Childress, the other star of the show, when Giorgio was pitching the idea of doing the pilot episode with Prometheus Entertainment. And Dave's like, "Oh, sure, Giorgio, I'll do it with you." And indirectly, that's kind of how I got invited on the show too. But basically, Eric von Daniken talked about the Nazca lines as saying many of these designs, and several of them are animals or insects or other life forms, you can only really discern their shape from above. So when you're standing at Nazca on ground level, you'll just see a line going far, far away. You don't even really can tell what it makes, what kind of animal it makes. So his contention was that they must have had some kind of way to elevate themselves off the ground to do these geoglyphs on such a massive scale. Or, according to Eric von Daniken in Chariot of the Gods, that they were building these geoglyphs as a way to attract these ancient visitors coming from the sky. And indeed, some of these geometric shapes are shaped like runways. They're just long rectangular forms. Land here. Come and have a lunch of monkey brains if you want. We did a geoglyph of a monkey, a howler monkey. So you know that we have these kind of ideas. But one of them that I bring up in my talk was this spider that has this little appendage on one of its arms. And in fact, it's a female carrying a sack of eggs. Well, these insects, these spiders, only live in the Amazon, which are several hundred miles away and way down into the Amazon basin. But also, you need a microscope to see that this mother holds its sack of eggs off of this one appendage. So it's just amazing that they had the ability to represent these life forms as geoglyphs way up high in the Atacama Desert in Peru, and to show that they had the knowledge of knowing how these animals existed.
Have you stood in the desert with the lines?
I've seen them from a distance. I didn't have the opportunity to get up high to go. I've also been out to Blythe, California, right along the Colorado River bordering Arizona, where there are geoglyphs right here in North America. And I write about them in my book, Sacred Places North America and Sacred Places Around the World. I have the geoglyphs of Nazca in there as well.
Do you think there are some lesser known pre-Inca secrets that are still hidden in Machu Picchu?
So Machu Picchu, wow, what an incredible site. That is the crown jewel of all the pre-Incan architecture, because it was never discovered by the Spaniards, who probably would have disbanded whatever community was there and maybe even destroyed some of the megaliths. So they are going up and down the river down below, and you can see the river from certain spots, but they never found this site. It wasn't until Hiram Bingham in 1911 followed the Inca Trail, and we walked several miles of that as it connected to Machu Picchu, and discovered this city in the age of photography. So there are pictures of Machu Picchu before it was discovered and still covered in jungle. And it was not habitat at that time. It had been abandoned for many hundreds of years, but it was one of the locations, one of the citadels where an Incan king could go and live. And there are these fountains, which they're called, where the water still flows. There are some springs way up there. And I would assume that's why the Incans chose this site, because when you have water, you have crops and life, that they had to have these springs flowing, and they built them into these fountains that flowed and they're still flowing to this day. You can still capture a handful of water and take a drink out of these fountains. And so that's one of the big mysteries, is where are these springs coming from, and how are they able to build around this flowing water and use it for all the terraces where they farmed right there. And that's still very visible at Machu Picchu. So I think that's one of the biggest mysteries still, as well as the Intihuatana. Maybe I didn't pronounce that right, but it is the sundial on Machu Picchu that still very accurately can predict the seasons. So if you were, say, a shaman who was living in Machu Picchu way back in the day, and you were able to project when the rainy season was going to come, that would be very important information that you would tell the farmers. Okay, don't plant just yet. The rain's going to come in about 3 weeks, and then we plant our crops, and then it'll grow and sustain life. So there's still those kind of secrets about how they knew the atmosphere and the season so well as they did at Machu Picchu.
Are there any haunted or portal-like locations in South America that you've investigated? And if so, what paranormal phenomena have you witnessed?
Well, I can't say I witnessed any myself, but there is a site called Maru, which is also located on the banks above Lake Titicaca, which is this doorway that was just carved into a very prominent cliff face. And it is supposedly this location where people have gone missing since time immemorial. It's even written about in the Lonely Planet book that, and they cited a case of, I think there were Italian tourists who were there, and a couple of them were just out of view. And then the other two went there and they did this chant, and they hit the right tone, I guess, because they went missing, and Lonely Planet reports that they still haven't come back. So I was at the Journey to Truth conference 2 years ago, and somebody who went to Maru, he said that he had learned the chant. I don't want to mention his name. Maybe he wants to stay private with this, but he did tell our group, because I was the moderator on a panel, and I learned that he knew about this. And I said, well, can you tell us what it was? And he did not do the chant, but he said that he learned it from a shaman. And in fact, he did it. He did the chant, and it's 6 tones, and you repeat it enough time. And in front of his wife and several other people that he was with, he disappeared. And he was right there at the door of the portal. He disappeared. He says he went in his consciousness. He was traveling down this long corridor of bright light. He came to a place, and to him it seemed like hours. But he said, I'm not comfortable. I want to go back. Please let me go back. He did the same chant. And then he was gone for, I think, a couple minutes, he said, according to the witnesses. To him, it felt like several hours. But then he came back and popped out, and everybody was like, oh, thank God you're back. And he did. But you know what? He did tell this publicly and on camera. And this is Jerry Wills. And he's as tall as I am. We're both 6'9", we're really tall guys. And but he wouldn't tell us what the chant was, just that it was 6 tones repeated. And then I guess when you hit the right note, it activates this portal. And he said he went off into the greater unknown.
Well, you wrote a book called Beyond Esoteric: Escaping Prison Planet. In this book, do you talk about these structures, and do they apply to escaping the prison?
To escaping the prison planet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of just a way that people can understand that Earth is not a prison in and of itself. It's a beautiful place. She said in the setup piece, I went up to all 7 continents, and it's a beautiful gem garden of a planet. It's the constructs that have been put upon us that create the prison planet. And that's why I create these books on esoteric subjects, so people can have an understanding how they did it, how we've been entrapped in this system, and how these controllers like to keep all this best information, these esoteric subjects, to themselves. So in the book, I have a chapter called Suppressed Human Origins that gets into a lot of basically the giants around the world, but also some of the megalithic drawings. And in fact, on my trip to South America, we saw some of the elongated skulls. And these are very interesting, Jeff, because they are human-like, bipedal, 2 big eyes, 30% larger eye sockets, and 30% larger cranium. Okay. So they're human-like, but they're not quite human. And these elongated skulls, this could be the answer to how these megalithic structures were made, because larger skull, larger body. And of course, we've heard in the Bible of giants from ancient times, the Anunnaki that came down. They saw that the earth women were fair and beautiful and mated with them. And then the offspring were the Nephilim. And that actually starts to make a lot of sense in the context of these ancient civilizations, because now you have a group of builders who would have the ways and the means with high technology and knowing about this resonant frequency and able to use it to build these megalithic structures around the world. So again, in Beyond Esoteric, I go into, and there's even a elongated skull right here on the cover, one with red hair, a red-haired giant. This is out of the museum in Paracas, Peru, where you can see dozens of these elongated skulls, some of them not even completely skull, with the little flesh and hair on them. And so Brian Forrester, who's on our trip, friend of mine, him and Klaus Donna also had a sample of these giants, and they've been doing genetic tests on them. And the results are all coming back the same, that they have a matriarchal DNA of Earth women, but an unknown DNA signature from the father, again and again and again. So it's just like the Bible describes, that these giants of old, they saw that the earth women were fair, they mated with them, and then they had these offspring of the Nephilim. So I often, when I do a conference talk on the giants, and I often remind people that you can actually mix similar species of animals. And the example is horses with donkeys, 2 very different species, but similar in the same horse family. And the result is you get a different species, which is a mule. And the mule is not able to reproduce anymore, but it can live out its life, and it will live as long as a donkey or a horse. And it's a separate species because it's been intermixed. Well, I would propose the same thing happen with these, the Anunnaki and the earth women, creating these elongated giants of renown, these Anunnaki, who then too could live a long life in and of themselves.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the enlarged eye sockets, because traditional science would say that the skulls are elongated from wrapping the heads, but that doesn't explain the eye sockets.
No, it doesn't. as well as the connection on the spine is also 30% larger. So again, larger head, larger body. And if you're just looking at the skull, yeah, you could say, well, it could be skull binding, which is a practice that's been done around the world. And indeed, you can shape a skull and make it with a larger bulbous head and back. But what you cannot do is add 30% larger cranial capacity. You can only work with what you've got when you're doing these wrapping and putting boards on top. There's a Native American tribe called the Nez Perce, and they were called the flatheads because they would bind their skulls by putting a board on top of an infant and pushing it back and creating these unique skull designs. Well, also with these elongated, and this is the picture I showed you, is that they're found in adolescence. Okay, this was like a toddler that had its skull is as big as its torso. And Brian Forrester, he and I, we communicate. He's shared information with me as well as some new findings of elongated skulls. And also now, just recently in the last month, they found a fetus of an elongated. And it already had the shape of its skull as it was developing in the wound. It had never been born. But I mean, how can you bind a skull when it's still a fetus? So proving that indeed these are a separate species altogether.
Are there any changes in the upper cervical spine? Like, are the bones bigger to be able to handle the weight of the skull?
Absolutely. That's why the spine connection to the skull is 30% larger. So a much larger frame of a body and a torso would be connected to these elongated skulls, which of course weigh more because they're larger by 30 to 35% larger cranial capacity.
Is there any evidence of pyramids or megalithic building in Antarctica?
My new book is coming out at the end of this year. It's called The Secrets of Antarctica. And indeed, I have a whole chapter about not one, but 3 pyramid sites in Antarctica. Now, I went down there 7 years ago on a sailboat. We went to the Palmer Peninsula, and I spent about a month on this sailboat going down there for this trip. We didn't get close to any one of the 3 that I bring up in the book, but I do have pictures of them, and I'll let the readers make up their own mind. But they could be what are called nunataks, which are just attractive pyramidal-shaped mountains poking out through the ice. However, if they were shown to have been designed with a kind of intelligence, aka being built as a megalithic structure, this is a complete game changer, Jeff. This actually shows that there had been a very high-tech civilization on this planet. And you can't go to these. Although if you could, I would actually like to go back down there and check them out and put this to rest once and for all. Because if they were intelligently built, then it would show that there was a high-tech civilization that lived in Antarctica before it turned to ice. Because again, like with underwater megalithic structures, how could you possibly build a pyramid and half of it is underneath the ice? So this could be a complete game changer if it is indeed real. And I bring out this information in my new book called Secrets of Antarctica, which is available for pre-sale on Amazon right now.
You may already be aware of this, but I recently had an astronomer on from the Lowell Observatory, and we were talking about that any rock that you find in Antarctica on the snow is a meteorite. Did you happen to see any rocks on the snow out there?
Well, we saw rocks, we saw mountains. West Antarctica, where we went on the sailboat, it's that finger of land that sticks up from Antarctica, and where we left from is southernmost tip of South America. That is the closest continental landmass to Antarctica. and it's a much newer landform than eastern Antarctica, where the ice is over 2 miles thick on top of the polar plateau on top of eastern Antarctica. And so when these scientists go down there every season to collect meteorites, Antarctica has been described as a large meteorite collector, because anything that falls on Antarctica will drop until someone comes around to get it. And I talk about this in the book too, that when they find them, they know they're meteorites, because how else would they just land on the middle of the polar plateau? And so they're sent to the Johnson Space Center, where they're analyzed, and then they are opened up to other universities for further research to look at them. So, in fact, one of the earliest meteorites that was found in the, I think it was in 1990s, had little trace elements of bacteria that came from Mars. Because some of these meteorites are actually from our moon and from Mars. So when another meteor hits, say, the moon or Mars, it'll kick up a bunch of dust and debris that'll actually make it off planet, and then it makes its way to Earth. So this particular one was from Mars and had some kind of bacteria. Official alien life on Earth that was discovered down in Antarctica.
You've traveled to all 7 continents and you've seen so many megalithic structures. If someone was a beginner and wanted to start making these trips themselves, what would you recommend as the best place to start?
Well, probably in Peru and Bolivia, to go see the Sacred Valley of the Incans and the pre-Incan megalithic architecture, which has the highest concentration of megaliths anywhere in the world. And also to go up to see Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, which are connected to each other. Very ancient pyramid in Tiwanaku as well. Pyramids on all 7 continents, Jeff. But also Egypt. There's nothing quite like Egypt anywhere in the world. There's so many artifacts and monuments there. And then my third choice would be the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They're just so fascinating. Some of them are still covered with jungle, and you see these banyan trees growing out of some of the temples. So yeah, if you want to really get that Indiana Jones feeling, Cambodia is certainly one of my favorites.
Do you find that Angkor Wat is more interesting than the pyramids of Giza?
Well, that's like saying, who's your favorite child? Each one of them has things that are equally appealing, and you never want to pick a favorite, but each one has aspects that are equally mesmerizing in the age and the ability to build, as well as the archaeoastronomy aspect. So when you find these megalithic sites, and most of them, such as Stonehenge in England and Karnak in France, these Neolithic stone sites that incorporate the sunrise or sunset on the solstices or the equinox, that are built directly into the structure itself. So, for example, Newgrange in Ireland, on the winter solstice, right at sunrise, the sun shines all the way through the chamber and illuminates this triple spiral in Newgrange. Now, that can't be an accident. That had to have been built specifically for that date, that moment. So when you factor in archaeoastronomy, how many of these structures, including Angkor Wat in Cambodia, features the sun popping right up over the top of the monument on the solstice dates, summer solstice, that you cannot have just built the monument. Oh, check it out. what do you know? It comes right there on the solstice. No. You had to have designed it specifically for that moment. So these structures are just getting more and more sophisticated when you look at the design and how they are positioned to incorporate these solstice and equinox sun dates.
Have you been to Eastern Turkey and the Ararat Valley of Armenia and seen some of those structures like Karahunj or Portasar/Göbekli Tepe?
Oh boy, it's high on my list, Jeff, but I have not been to Eastern Turkey yet. And then you also have Cappadocia, those structures in Derienku where they hollowed out in some land that wasn't very hard. It was basically volcanic ash that settled down, so they could burrow in and entire cities into these areas. And yeah, that's not too far away as well. And I'd love to go check those out too.
Some of these new historians seem to feel that the Ararat Valley may have been the original Eden, not further south in Iraq.
Well, indeed, both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which flow down through Iraq, originate in this eastern portion of Turkey. And that is where Babylon was. That is where Uruk and Ur, some of the earliest step pyramids, were also built in present-day Iraq. So, yeah, I mean, this truly is the cradle of civilization. And now that Göbekli Tepe has been dated as older than the last ice age, as older than many of the contemporary ruins, such as the pyramids in Egypt, is now being dated as the oldest site in the world. Well, gosh, there's another game changer for you, because now we're building megalithic sites during the last ice age. And that, too, is a big tell-all that civilization in this regard is much, much older than we've been giving it credit for.
You're going to be at the new Living Expo in April, right?
Yeah, it's actually in May.
Oh, man.
And I will be there. And I'll have a brand new presentation about what's under the ice in Antarctica. So I'll be giving my brand new talk there, and the book will be out by then. And I'm also just this morning was talking to Billy Carson, and he is going to get those Italian scientists who did the scans of the Giza Plateau. We're going to put together a interview with the four of us, and I'm going to tell them where to look under the ice in Antarctica. So we may have some new information by the time I speak at the new Living Expo of some recent scans, but because they've already been doing them, there's one I describe in my book, Secrets of Antarctica, called the Wissard scan, WISSRD. It's an acronym for this new technique of scanning under the ice. And some of these locations, again, they're finding whole city grids and plans. Could it be as old as Atlantis or earlier? Don't know. But I know where they could hit the scanners and we would get some readings that could be very, very intriguing. Could be right up there with what they found under the Giza Plateau.
I don't know if you're following the global climate, but is there any chance that Antarctica will be melting anytime soon?
Well, it's interesting because right when I came back from my trip, in fact, I was writing my older Antarctica presentation on the sailboat when I was coming back. And I was looking at maps before the trip, and NASA had just come out with a map, so about 8-9 years ago, of areas in Antarctica that were melting, but were also gaining ice. So there are areas, including where we went on the Palmer Peninsula, that are melting very fast. And it was evident in the changing migration patterns of several penguin species, but also when we went to Anvers Island to the Palmer base, the crew chief who was giving us the tour, he said that when he first started coming out there about 25 years ago, that the ice mass blocked the view of the mountains, which were now visible off in the distance. So that's how quickly this is happening in this area. But conversely, Mother Nature, in her infinite wisdom, is making certain areas of Antarctica raise its ice level. And in fact, the big story of this year was they found that these areas that are raising in ice level gained a net gain of ice in this last season instead of a net loss. It's now gaining ice. And this is why you haven't seen these catastrophic sea level rises, is for every time, at least in Antarctica, where certain areas are losing their pack ice, other areas are gaining it.
About 9 months ago, Trump used to talk a lot about wanting to buy Greenland. Do you think that there's something there under the ice that they want?
Well, the Danes aren't selling it as Denmark controls Greenland. But where he's talking about this base, it's called the Thule base, Thule. And it's at the far northern part of Antarctica. And he wants it because if you have a radar station there, if missiles were coming over from Russia, and the most direct path would be over the Arctic Ocean, they could have an early detection system and maybe even use some of the anti-missile defenses to shoot them down. But that particular base, the Thule base in northern Greenland, was actually founded by the Germans, just like New Schwabenland during World War II. They had a base there too. And when the war was over, the Allies took it over. But Denmark, which had ruled before the World War II, they were using it, but then they let the Americans use it. But now we want it all for our own. So what's down below there? Yeah, I think that could be as big of a mystery as Antarctica. And we shall see, because there too, in certain areas of Greenland, you have mass melting and then areas that are actually gaining in ice too.
I had Billy on a couple weeks ago, and he talked about that he's going to the Bosnian pyramid. Are you joining him on that?
Yeah, we're both going to be speakers at Dr. Sam Osmanovich's conference in June, middle of June. Billy Carson and I will both be speakers there. And I met Dr. Sam several times, and I wrote about the Bosnian pyramids in my book, Sacred Places Europe. And that is a really fascinating location too, because you have these tunnels underneath the Bosnian pyramid that just like the tunnels below the Great Pyramid in Egypt, show that there is some kind of passageway system. And indeed, Dr. Osmanovich, he's done several tests on the inside the chambers directly below, and he's found that they very similar to the Great Pyramid have this. Here's my map of the pyramids there with some of the tunnel systems, and more have been found since this book has come out. But there are ancient tunnels down there, which, like the Great Pyramid, show signs of an intense energy collection. And that's basically what pyramids do, is they can focus the earth energy up through the four sides and through the center and then up over the top. And there are actually photographs of light beams showing mostly on cameras, but I've seen them at Chichen Itza Pyramid on the Yucatan in Mexico, as well as the Great Pyramids, that sometimes people take a picture and you'll see a beam of light shooting up from the top of these pyramids. And that emphasizes that they are energy collectors from the earth energy itself and focusing up through the middle and then through the top. So it makes sense that they would build chambers like the King's Chamber and the Great Pyramid, or these underground passages to also collect some of this earth energy. And Dr. Sam says it's helped people with diseases, and it gives you a better feeling, a well-being, and that is also has to do with the ley lines, the ley line earth energy grid, which encompasses the whole planet. And at the intersection point of many of these ley lines, you find these temples all around the world. And so I've been very interested in learning more and more about ley line energy, and going to these places, and of course writing about them in my Sacred Places series of books.
You know, those Italian scientists did all those underground imaging under the Great Pyramid and saw those columns going down, I don't know, miles perhaps. What is your take on what they found?
Oh, it's absolutely groundbreaking. Those scans were done with satellites. So they didn't need to get the permission from the Egyptian authorities. So back when I was in Egypt in 1993, I didn't even know it, but they were doing scans of the Giza Plateau and finding more of the shallow cave systems down below there. And all those engineers, once they presented their findings, they got kicked out of the country. And the Egyptian Antiquities Office of Zahi Hawass, they took it over and pretty much said, "Oh, nothing to see here. Don't talk about what's under the Giza Plateau." So when they did it with the satellite, they circumvented and went above the authority of the Egyptians because they weren't on the ground doing it. And so this has been called Egypt Gate ever since 1983, as well as when Rudolf Gattenbrink, he invented that robot that went up the air shaft of the Queen's Chamber. And that's where they found the door. And then Zahi Hawass took over that one too. And they opened the door only to find another door. But the mysteries just keep compounding how many questions there are that are unanswered at the Giza Plateau. So what are these structures underground? Well, I think they probably had something to do with capturing this earth energy and focusing it up to through the top of the Great Pyramid, and as well as the other pyramids.
What's the title of your new book that's coming out?
Secrets of Antarctica, the untold history of the ice continent.
What's your website if people want to find out more about what you're up to?
If you want to find out my conference schedule, that's at bradolsen.com. That's just like it's spelled, BRADOLSEN, and other projects that I'm involved with. But all my books are available at cccpublishing.com. And then if you get a book off my website, then you can get a signed copy because they come through my office here in Nevada.
Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Well, we are on the brink of a massive grassroots upwelling of a consciousness upgrade that's called the Great Awakening. And there's no time in human history that's been like this, where so much that has been hidden is now coming to the fore. And I'll just give an example. Tucker Carlson did an interview with Dane Wigington on chemtrails. And I have a chapter on geoengineering in Beyond Esoteric. Well, when something goes mainstream, it's no longer an esoteric subject. It becomes exoteric. And so maybe in a future edition of beyond esoteric, I'll have to take out the geoengineering chapter when everybody starts to realize that this has been going on all along. Because now these esoteric subjects that have been just withheld from humanity and known by only a select few are now becoming common knowledge. So it's a great time to be alive and watch all this happen, because we are in the middle, at the beginning stages of the Great Awakening, this awakening of humanity. And so my message is just hang on, folks. This is going to be one heck of a show for all of us to witness in the next months and years.
Brad, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest again.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for having me on, and we should do it again sometime.
Let's do it. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.